Another 2008 election, what if? Which is, what if the general election for that year, instead of being between McCain and Obama, had been fought between Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee and Condoleezza Rice as the Republican nominee? This was actually first thought of, or I guess popularized, by Dick Morris. He wrote a book in 2005, Condi versus Hillary, and he argued that Rice was the only person who could block Clinton from winning the White House in 2008, and laid out both the pros and cons of both candidates. Admittedly, I haven't read the book, um, but it's so interesting to think about how he was accurate about Clinton wanting to run and then running, but also the miscalculation of thinking that Rice would ever be tempted to run, and also just having no idea about Obama. It's fascinating how in a few years things can go in a completely different direction from what someone might have predicted it to be. Now, assuming in this hypothetical that Rice decides to run, I'm not entirely sure she can win the Republican primary against McCain. I think that McCain had a built in infrastructure from 2000 and the name recognition to go along with it. Obviously, Rice had name recognition as Bush's Secretary of State, but I still wouldn't say it was the same amount. But we're just going to have to skip over that part and say that she wins the nomination because McCain doesn't run or his campaign isn't that great. And Clinton would presumably, and this is what's so interesting about doing this now, because looking at this through the prism of 2008, the actual election, right? And Clinton's time as Secretary of State, and of course, her 2016 loss to Trump. You say it because I try to be as non biased as I can when I'm giving these scenarios. I'm obviously not some Hillary supporter, and that's been established multiple times on this channel. But Clinton is someone that, for whatever reason, now of course, we know one of the reasons is she's not a very good campaigner, but for whatever reason, she gets all of these scandals around her. And like, even if you were to just go back to 2008, so you have no, like, assuming Obama doesn't become president, or would never become president, at least in 2008, in this scenario where Clinton gets nomination, you have no, email scandal, no Benghazi, right? That stuff doesn't exist. Even if you just go off of the 8 years in the Senate and her time as First Lady, she is still a scandal prone monstrosity of a candidate. And you know what? We can pretend. So, my own personal theory is that Clinton's scandals don't really affect voters that much in a general election or in a primary, because they kind of just gotten used to the idea that, yeah, this person will have something that is made out to be a bigger deal than it is. I really don't think most of that stuff works in terms of, like, I feel most normal voters know there's like a built-in infrastructure to just not liking Hillary. Um, but I do also believe that there are voters who have legitimate grievances with this lady that date back to these earlier periods, whether it was her voting for the Iraq War, the Patriot Act, and these are things that would make her much weaker, because a lot of that stuff happened. For example, like, if it was Obama versus Rice, which I couldn't even imagine, but just for example, Rice would not be able to say, "Oh, Obama, you have a problem with the Patriot Act and Iraq. Well, you voted for these things. You support," and that's what's interesting, because I was talking about when I did my hypothetical of, like, Rice as McCain's running mate against Obama and Biden, rather. I talked about how Biden would be able to use, in a hypothetical vice presidential debate, Rice's support for Iraq, or being one of the proponents of the Iraq War, as a basis to say, look, you don't have good foreign policy ideas, you lied us into this conflict, etc. But the fact that Rice could point to Hillary and say, look, whether you agree with the war now or not, you still supported it when it began. You still went along with it. You backed many of the administration's policies. Uh, and she could say, why would you want to counterfeit continuation? Because, and this is what's so interesting about 2008, how a lot of us were excited at the prospect of hope and change, and through the actual person that won, we got a lot of the same old stuff. But Rice could say to Hillary, hey, I was part of the administration that did these things that you're now critiquing, but your votes indicate that you supported us, and we have no reason to believe that once you get into office, you won't also be caught supporting or enacting many of the same policy ideas. Um, and really that goes back to the detriment of Hillary, which is that we know that she likes to take a public position, a private position, as talked about with her donors. She's not a strong campaigner. This is a woman who lost to a random first term senator with a name that a lot of people were not comfortable with, or had some reservations about. Uh, and then 8 years later, lost to a game show host. So if she's, because I said before, Rice is really good at, even if you disagree with her, sounding comfortable and I'd say likable in the general sense of, when she talks, you kind of get this idea of this is someone who knows what they're speaking on. And I believe that if she was pitted against Hillary, she would bombard her with Senate votes that aligned with the Bush administration. Um, any proposals that Clinton had, she could easily say, "Hey, look, I don't think you guys are going to be able to pay for this." That's typically the running theme of the GOP, their mantra: "How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it?" And Clinton, she might be able to muster a few responses, but her inability to both appear likable and also reconcile with the factions, because Hillary is not some, she's a much more polarizing figure than I think Obama ever was. Even like back, we talked before about when he became president, he had a almost 70% approval rating, just extremely popular, and popularity plays a part, I believe, in electability. Um, so even if there are people who have misgivings about Rice because, oh, she's never held any elected office before, or running for president, this hypothetical, they're still going to take her over Hillary because there are legitimate grievances that people have had with Clinton dating back over a decade at this point. I mean, Clinton already knows she's not going to win the Republican voters that are still talking about Whitewater and Vince Foster and all the rest of that stuff. But she would also be gone after by a lot of the anti-war people who would say, look, we don't think Rice is some great, amazing superstar that's going to transform things from the way that Bush has held them or had them, but you're not exactly anything we'd get excited for. It's going to be kind of like, and I guess that's where 2016 is kind of informing my belief system here, where it's hard to see Clinton as being able to bridge that divide, because it's like, you would think she comes back after 2008 and runs this campaign where you would believe she's learned her lessons from back then, and then still gets crushed. But many of the same mistakes that were present back in 2008 were present in 2016. I think they would be present in a general election campaign. I think you could pit pretty much any Republican against Hillary, and if they take like an anti-war stance and they talk about corruption and right how she's enriched herself with Goldman Sachs, or I mean, the Clinton Foundation was a popular target to attack even back then, you would really be able to see most of them, I think, trounce her in swing states. And also, we've talked before about how Hillary's not really good at projecting herself as being like a working class champion, uh, which is something that her contemporaries like Obama or Biden have been able to do. And Rice, while certainly having the baggage of the Bush years, can still, as a person who's involved with his cabinet relating to foreign affairs, say, hey, look, I don't support this particular policy that President Bush is enacting, but if you vote for me, I have my own plan, and I have no decision over what he says. So I think there's a case to be made that she'd have been able to distance herself, maybe not as much as she would like, from what was at the time the subprime mortgage crisis by saying, I'm not involved with the economic policy of the administration. Um, Here's my proposal, and that would be another blow to Hillary. So I believe if it was Hillary versus Rice in 2008, I lean towards Rice having been able to win. It's not impossible for Clinton to win. It probably would be a tight election, kind of like 2000, but not as tight. I don't think it would come down to one or two states. Um, but I just think that Hillary is a really weak candidate, and I don't think is great at public speaking. I don't think is great at depicting herself as a champion of the working class, of the anti-war voters. And these are coalitions you need if you're going to be able to defeat the Republican candidate. I think Rice, even if she has the appearance of like the academic person, can still use her personal backstory as well as her involvement with only one section of the Bush administration's policies to ward off criticisms of and associations of her with the incumbent president. Now, if you want to talk about stuff that might stop that has me kind of like convinced she might have a problem, it's that, and this really shouldn't matter. Like for me, it would not matter, but I just have to mention, in 2008, I don't know if people would be okay with not even a woman president, because whatever, in this scenario they've both won the primaries, but with a woman who is single. I hate to say that, I really do, but we have to talk about how some voters can take something that really isn't that big of a deal and flip it on its head. Sometimes things that really just don't matter get made out to be of some consequence by virtue of it turning a person off. Like when Richard Ojeda, the West Virginia candidate, ran for president, there were people who didn't support him or didn't like him because he admitted that he voted for Trump in 2016. Now, I think it's dumb to oppose a candidate because of their admitted voting history in one election, but that's what people do. They always find stuff to have a problem with someone over, even if it really doesn't matter when it comes to the actual issues at hand. So that might play into Hillary's advantage, even though Clinton herself probably would not bring it up. It's just one of those things where, unfortunately, anytime you have a person who is single of a certain age, they start spreading. I mean, you see this with Lindsey Graham, you see this with Tim Scott. It's more so with men, but they kind of like playing this angle that maybe you're not, maybe you don't have a partner because you swing a certain. I hate to mention it in that kind of, because it really should not matter, but it would be something some voters would think about. I like to believe it wouldn't be enough to stop people who just don't want Hillary from you know, voting for Rice, but because I always like when this stuff is about policy, but that's one of the problems with American politics. A lot of it is a popularity contest. A lot of it is stuff that doesn't really gel with what's serious and what matters. But all in all, I would lean towards Rice winning if they were pitted against each other in 2008. I think in hindsight, it's been easier for me to believe that Clinton still could have and would have lost as the nominee 8 years earlier than she ended up being, because her campaigns have been pretty lousy across the board, and she didn't learn her lessons from the actual 2008 campaign when she lost to a game show host 8 years later. So I know I sound like this big Rice sycophant, but I just think that she doesn't her in a way, she would benefit from the same thing Obama did, where it's like a clean slate person people aren't as familiar with and they're more trusting. Now, of course, Rice was more national, I'd say more well known in 2004 or 5 than Obama was, but it's that same idea of like, we can talk about what Hillary did in the 90s. What was Rice doing in the 90s? Oh, serving as a member of Bush 41's administration. So just stuff like that where I think she doesn't have the baggage that Clinton does, and anything that she has a problem with, I think most of it could be warded off depending on what her campaign people consist of. So yeah, I think Rice would have won.